Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us today, and welcome to the webinar on implementing gender responsive, socially inclusive, and climate resilient infrastructure in South Asia. On behalf of the Global Center on Adaptation and the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, I warmly welcome to today's discussion. My name is Savina Carluccio. I'm the Executive Director at International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, or ICSI for short, and I am delighted to be the moderator today webinar. The Global Center on Adaptation, in partnership with ICSI, and with support with the Government of Canada, has developed a guide on integrating gender, climate, and social inclusion in infrastructure development. This guide will serve as a practical resource for stakeholders involved in climate adaptation projects across transport, energy, and social infrastructure sectors. It will address key vulnerabilities, incorporate gender-specific impacts and social inclusion considerations, and provide actionable recommendations for gender-responsive, socially inclusive, and climate-resilient infrastructure. Today's event is to disseminate the key findings from this project among the stakeholders from South Asia. While the guide focused on Bangladesh, findings and lessons are transferable across South Asia and will be shared. So today's webinar will have three short presentations followed by Q&A. So that's where you will have an opportunity to ask questions of our experts today. Please use the Q&A function in the Zoom to put your question forward at any time. So let me just, with any further ado, introduce Rita Lohani, Country Representative at GCA Bangladesh, who will be delivering opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody, and a warm welcome. On behalf of the Global Center on Adaptation, also known as GCA, it is my pleasure to open today's webinar on implementing gender-responsive, socially inclusive, and climate-resilient infrastructure in South Asia. At GCA, we work globally to accelerate climate adaptation by supporting governments and partners with practical tools, policy guidance, and investment solutions that strengthen resilience on the ground. We are grateful to all of you. And of course, we have policymakers, infrastructure professionals, development partners, financing institutions, and of course, inclusion experts who have helped make this successful. And of course, for some of you for joining us virtually today. Across South Asia, infrastructure systems are increasingly exposed to climate risks. And that includes flooding, cyclones, saline intrusion, extreme rainfall, and of course, heat stress. These risks disrupt essential services, they strain public investment systems, and of course, threaten long-term development outcomes. As countries scale up climate-resilient infrastructure investments, the quality and inclusiveness of those investments become even more important. Climate risks are not gender neutral. Women and marginalized communities often face higher exposure to climate impacts and greater barriers in accessing infrastructure services. If resilience measures do not account for these differentiated impacts, they risk reinforcing existing inequalities. Therefore, climate-resilient infrastructure must also be gender-responsive and socially inclusive by design. Today, we're pleased to disseminate a guide to gender-responsive, socially inclusive, and climate-resilient infrastructure. The guide provides practical methodologies, tools, and policy-relevant recommendations to support the integration of gender and social inclusion across the full infrastructure lifecycle, from project identification and preparation to appraisal, design, and operations. So we really hope that it'll be very, very useful for a myriad of practitioners. While the guide draws on the Bangladesh context, the lessons and approaches are highly relevant across South Asia. And thank you so much. The partnership with the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure has yielded in this, we think, a highly valuable document. And of course, we've done this with the generous support of the Government of Canada. We're grateful for this collaboration, which enables us to translate global expertise into actionable guidance for practitioners and decision makers. And we hope today's discussion will not only raise awareness, but also encourage institutional buy-in and practical application. Your perspectives and experiences will be invaluable in strengthening the integration of gender-responsive climate resilience into infrastructure planning and investment processes. With that, I look forward to engaging in a constructive discussion, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Rita, for today's opening remarks. It's now time to go into the presentation so that we can delve a little bit into the content. Today we have the project team, which is a team composed of experts on different topics: climate resilience, infrastructure development, gender and social inclusion. And we have worked together to develop this guide. And we have also learned quite a lot by doing this project in Bangladesh, so we're really keen to share with you today. So let me introduce the first speaker, Dr. Sayel Cortez, who is a sustainability, resilience, climate, and urban governance expert, and who will be delivering the first presentation. I'll remind you again, please use a Q&A function in the Zoom. So if you want to ask a question on the topic or relevant to the specific presentation, you'll have 3 opportunities to ask your questions. Sayel, over to you.
Thank you, Sabina. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to start with a contextualization on the gender, social, and inclusion infrastructure, following the work we did for this guide. First of all, I think it's very important to remind ourselves that climate change is not a neutral force. We often think about it as something happening for everybody, but it's actually the way it impacts people is quite different depending on the conditions of the person. So it works more as a vulnerability multiplier that reinforces the existing social inequalities that there are and creates some new. Now, this is very important, so I want to go into a few examples to show what I'm talking about, what we mean. So let's start, for example, health crisis. Imagine that the area that you are gets flooded sometimes. And maybe it happened for a long time. You get used to it. There's some provisions to protect from the floods. But maybe during the flood, there's no reliable transportation for vulnerable people. If that's the case, then those that have restricted mobility, such as pregnant women, children, the elderly, might turn simple health issues into life-threatening emergencies. It might be very hard for them to escape. So what was very easy to manage before, because of climate change, it becomes very hard to manage. Another example very common to South Asia is time poverty for women. As we know, a lot of the time it's the women in the family who take care of getting the water for the household. But with droughts, with saline intrusion, it might take them really much more effort and time to get this water. So they really face this challenge in a different way that it would happen for other people in the family. Mobility barriers are another examples. Climate risk make it more dangerous for the people with limited mobility, such as people with disabilities, the elderly, women, children, to evacuate on time. Because we know that in a lot of places, the roads are not very reliable. A hurricane, for example, or a cyclone can make it very hard to walk if there's no good infrastructure. So these are barriers that maybe don't affect everybody in the same way, but for some people, they become really, really issues. Finally, the last example that I have here is heat risk. We all experience these heat waves and it affects everybody, but people that already have the health compromise, elderly, outdoor workers, might really be at risk of life inclusive in these situations. While many of us, we can probably run to the shadow or hide some way. Not everybody can do it, and that's very important. So I want you to think a little bit to put in context this is how are these gender and inclusion vulnerabilities being reinforced by climate change in your country? It's very important to think about it because every country is a little bit different. And of course, as Sabina already mentioned, this research was initially focused on Bangladesh, but there's a lot of commonalities. I think a lot of countries in South Asia face similar cyclone risk, flooding risk, drought risk. So everything that we're saying can be connected in this way. Now, it's important to know, okay, climate change is a vulnerability multiplier. It makes things worse. What can we do about it? Well, here we're talking about the opportunity of using infrastructure to improve that situation. And the key to this is moving from resilient assets to resilient services, infrastructure services. So usually in infrastructure, we think about physical climate risk and gender objectives separately. And there's good work doing in that in the countries in the region. And I think all over the world, things are improving little by little, but not always they are integrated. And the importance of being integrated is to really address these reinforced vulnerabilities that I mentioned before. And this is very important because when we think about climate resilience, for example, for infrastructure, we can make infrastructure that is very strong, very resistant, but at the end, because of the gender and socially inclusive challenges, it doesn't deliver infrastructure services for everybody. So at the end, even if the infrastructure is strong, not everybody's benefiting from it. Let me be a little bit more explicit with this and what we mean. Here, we try to explain the connection between gender, climate, and infrastructure, well, what we call the gender, climate, infrastructure nexus. And you can see it in the diagram, but going one by one, we have been talking, and I've been mentioning how climate exacerbates the vulnerabilities. So they all connected. But why is this important? What is this new? Because normally we start thinking for infrastructure resilience in a separate way. So how do we make sure that the physical assets can withstand the climate hazards? And there's some progress on this. I think many places are doing good progress on this. Perhaps more recently, we start thinking about making gender responsive infrastructure, make sure that vulnerable populations can use the infrastructure in a good way, that they have specific designs that helps them to use this infrastructure, but rarely we connect them. And this is the key point of this work that we are doing to create gender responsive, socially inclusive, and resilient infrastructure. This is when we integrate both, and not only we provide resilient services for everybody, but as I will mention a little bit later, it also creates opportunities for more inclusive social development. So starting to think about how to address this issue. 4 enablers that we found that are very important to create resilient infrastructure for everybody, and that should be integrated across the whole infrastructure system, is the use of disaggregated data. A lot of times we focus on average, and unfortunately, the average makes that the people who are vulnerability are not well considered in the designs, in the needs identification, in the way infrastructure is working. So collecting and using disaggregated data by sex, by age, by disabilities is very important to make sure that their needs are identified. Also, sustainable participation. Being inclusive means taking everybody's opinion in a true way, in a meaningful way, engaging with the local community, taking the local knowledge and the local leadership together when designing and identifying the needs and managing infrastructure, makes that infrastructure really works for the people that it's serving. One thing that I already mentioned that is very important is the gender climate infrastructure nexus. So considering how climate change is reinforcing, multiplying some vulnerability, that's something that has to be considered across the infrastructure provision. And finally, having inclusive employment. Make sure that we have vulnerable groups taking part in the infrastructure staff, in the workforce, ensures that their points of view are included in every single way. So that's also very important and helps also to create more benefits from the infrastructure for these communities. Now, when we think about delivering infrastructure, we think about the infrastructure life cycle. These are 4 steps that are always used to provide infrastructure in general. So, of course, it starts by identifying the needs. Where do we need infrastructure? What kind of infrastructure is needed? What needs are required in the community? And then from here, initial concept notes, project concepts, are further analyzed in the planning for infrastructure. So we know there's a need in the community. Now we want to plan how can we address it. And it includes doing more detailed feasibility studies, more development of the projects, keep working on that, start to see the finance. This is the second stage of the infrastructure life cycles. Once we have all these, it's basically we know what we have to do, is approved, we have budget for that, then we go to delivering it. And this is when it goes designing and specifically procured and constructed. So this process is usually where we think about creating infrastructure, but it's just one step in a long life cycle. And finally, once infrastructure is constructed, it has to be operated and maintained. And this is very important because sometimes the initial design is good, but it's not maintained in such a way that everybody can use the infrastructure. So we have to consider gender inclusion and resilience across the 4 stages of the infrastructure life cycle. Now, I'm not going to go in detail into how to do this because there's a lot of detail like that. But in the guide that we prepared that Sabine already mentioned, we put detailed and concrete recommendations for each of these steps. So for example, in the needs identification, it's very important to work at the level of the policies and plans. And here are some initial, some concrete recommendations for that. And also the prioritization is not only identify the needs of the people and the vulnerable population, but also to consider alongside the different priorities to make sure they're addressed, especially the most important needs are addressed. Same for the feasibility preparation, for the funding and financing. It's very common that we think about gender or resilience as an add-on, something at the end that, okay, we have budget, we do it, but that usually leads to cuts and that at the end result doesn't match the needs identified. So how to integrate it from the beginning is crucial for this. So these are general recommendations, but the guide also provides very specific design recommendations for each type of infrastructure. And we have several big tables explaining these recommendations in the guide. I'm just taking a small example as a teaser, which of course I'm not going to go in detail. There's a lot of words here, but I just want to show you how we look at the impacts for the infrastructure. We look at the general climate adaptive responses. And then for each type of infrastructure, in this case for roads, what are the minimum compliance measures that every country should include? What are the next level that measures that can be considered to make sure that HEDS is included, that the vulnerable populations are empowered in this? And finally, what is the highest standard that we should reach to? How can we do infrastructure that it doesn't comply only with the minimum, but that it really contributes to transform society into a more inclusive and resilient society? So by providing these 3 levels of recommendations for design to a wide range of infrastructures in the transport, in the social, and in the energy infrastructure sectors, we allow that every country and every community in different regions have a pathway to improve to a social resilient and inclusive to a resilient and inclusive society. So this is how the guide is done, and it's helpful to serve as a tool for everybody. And why is this important? Because when we create infrastructure, we are not just building concrete buildings and all that. We really want to provide services for the community that enable to grow more safe and more inclusively. So infrastructure really works as a catalyzing factor for social resilience and inclusive development. And in this sense, there's also some considerations that we need so that the benefits of infrastructure don't stay only in the infrastructure, but go to the surrounding communities. So it's important to mainstream the inclusive employment across the infrastructure sectors to create more opportunities for them to work and to give their opinion, to empower the vulnerable groups. And there's many ways to do that, but creating, for example, markets that are inclusive and safe for women allows them to have better livelihoods. And if the market is also resilient, then the livelihood becomes resilient. And these income opportunities eventually spread out to the communities. And of course, this requires constant and spread out building of capacities and awareness, because it's not only the person who builds the infrastructure or who designs the infrastructure. We really need everybody who is around this infrastructure system to know of the importance of gender, inclusion, and resilience, and to do it in a continuous way. So this is what I wanted to put to set the stage, to give you a general overview. And now, if there's any Q&As, I'll be happy to address them. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Sayel, for this presentation. It just starts to really tease the key message that we need to be looking at this as an integrated issue, whilst it's still actually being looked at in silos. So we have a couple of questions for you that popped up, and not necessarily the easiest one to answer, but anyway, I'm going to ask them anyway. So the issue of the nexus, right, and wanting to just looking at this as an integrated infrastructure development, but this is actually one of the biggest barriers is governance. So institutions and governments are organized in silos, and how could we move towards breaking the silos and looking at this as an integrated issue, and still have some accountability and some kind of responsibility of different actors involved. Any thoughts on this?
Yes, Sabina, thank you. This is a very important question. It's not an easy one, definitely. I think in many areas of governance, we talk about silos and how governments and governance as a whole can be improved by increasing communication. Specifically, when we talk about climate resilience, gender, and infrastructure, is quite a challenge because usually those three areas are part of different organizations within the government, different ministers. I think what we propose in the guide, and I think it's a very important way to look at it, is to integrate this climate, gender, inclusion at different levels. So we need a strategic framework at the top that sets the big goals, the enablers, as we mentioned, these four enablers that should be throughout the infrastructure system. And then each of the ministers should have their own internal strategies aligned with the national one for sure, that tells you within that organization how to implement it. And then we go even lower to the project base. Every project should have a plan to integrate gender and climate resilience that goes specifically how these projects contributed to the bigger strategies. So by doing it at these different levels, then everything can coordinate. And even though they are physically different in different ministers, they can really work together to work as a whole and to integrate these issues. But it's not an easy task, and I think it's always a challenge for every country.
It's how we're set up as humans, I guess, working in silos, unfortunately. But I think I want to pick up on something that was done during this project, which was linking to what Rita said at the start. It's like institutional buy-in, right? You need some institutional buy-in when you develop this type of guidance and resource. And this is something that the project has done, right? We had engagement with the GED, right, in Bangladesh, because we were working in Bangladesh. We had engagement with that specific part of the government that is in charge of the planning, right? And that might have that decision-making power and that ability to integrate. So as you've described in how it could work in different institutions in Bangladesh, as a first step, we definitely have engage with different levels of government and governance, and trying to even start tracing those connections, right? Trying starting breaking those silos. So just to give a bit of a context from the project, that could be applicable in other countries in Southeast Asia, identifying the coordinating entity or possible coordinating entity or something that can kind of come top down as a requirement for infrastructure projects. There is something else that I wanted to ask you, which is more about, and again, another difficult one, because we're thinking about economic implications and financing and all of that, right? When we're thinking about climate resilient infrastructure, even though adaptation, it should be easy, and it's not even just that easy to make the business case for adaptation, but it is more understandable the economic impacts when disasters strike, right? But then what are the economic implications? What are the kind of the social and economic implications for infrastructure systems when we start looking at climate resilient infrastructure to an intersectional lens? How is this affecting the economic and social considerations? How do we need to think about these things?
Sabina, not any easy question to make it easy to answer, but this is a very important one. I mean, I think in principle we all understand that we have to be resilient, we have to be inclusive, but when we try to implement it, we face the restrictions. Like, of course, budget is restricted. There's the need for prioritization. How to consider this in this context? I think that's something very interesting that is highlighted in the guide. Is that it's not always cost. A lot of times, making the infrastructure more inclusive can actually include more people in the process. For example, the local communities, which doesn't have to be more expensive. I mean, it's probably the same cost to pay to someone from the city that someone for a local community. Sometimes even cheaper in that you already have the people there with the knowledge. So I think something that is important to understand is gender inclusive, gender responsive, social inclusive, and resilient infrastructure doesn't have to be significantly more expensive. Sometimes it is at the beginning, like the initial cost might be higher, but in the long term, it's usually cheaper because it provides new economic opportunities. The more people the infrastructure can serve, the more social benefits that it creates. If you include people, you can create economic opportunities for the communities thanks to the infrastructure. So at the end, there's a cycle of creation of value that really generates more benefits from the similar cost a lot of the times. So in the guide, there's some concrete interventions. For example, creating spaces for women to work and generate income inside of the infrastructure or through the infrastructure process. And we go into detail in the case of Bangladesh, but I'm sure similar cases can be done in many South Asian countries. And overall, that's the idea. Like the infrastructure is not the end goal, it's an enabler for the community, for the economic and social systems. So by having it more resilient and more inclusive, the economy and the society as a whole can be more resilient and can work better and grow bigger.
The virtuous cycle, right, that we want to trigger through this type of infrastructure. We do have another question for you before I move on to the next presenter, and this is about the disability inclusion. I mean, we've made quite a big effort in trying and always look not just through the gender lens, but also through social inclusion, including persons with disabilities. And so the question for you here is, how do you specifically integrate disability inclusion in the implementation process? And I know there are also examples from other presenters later on, and also a follow-up question is, are there any examples that combine both disability inclusion and resilience?
Yes, definitely. And the specific connection between disability and resilience, I think, is very important. In most cases that we analyze, is climate change that reinforces the gender or social inclusion vulnerabilities. But in the case of disabilities, probably the only one I remember that is it can also go the other way around. It go in both directions. On one side, of course, if it's flooded and you have mobility issues, you're going to have problem to move to evacuate and to move around. That's a very clear way in which climate change is affecting you, particularly because you have a specific disability. But there's the other case around. Let's say that, for example, there's an early warning system for any kind of hazard. If you cannot see well or you cannot hear well, maybe the alarms or the signs are not helpful for you. So having some disabilities can reinforce the climate risk in this case. So it's a very important component. About concrete examples, definitely we have plenty in the guide. One that is especially highlighted and I think it's very important is the cyclone shelters, for example, in Bangladesh. As you all know, there's a big region in Bangladesh that is affected by cyclones, and there's been a long process to make them more inclusive and including for people with disabilities. So in the latest standards now, they have ramps. They also consider the access roads to make sure that they're more clear and easy to access for people with disability. So that's a very concrete physical example when the infrastructure to make a society more resilient is becoming more inclusive also to people with disabilities. But there are many in the transportation systems, in the social infrastructures, in the markets, how to make it more inclusive and resilient at the same time. Is that's just one that we highlight from the guide, but yeah, definitely very important connection there.
Thank you, Sayel, and I'm sure they will hear more about this because if I'm not wrong, one of our presenters will talk about this specific example in more detail. Also important, I think, to note that we want to think about the persons with disability as users, but also as workforce, right? You know, this is something else that we consider in the guide, and then when it will be available, I've seen also a question in the chat. The guide is not available yet. It will be available in the next few weeks. And we will be really pleased to share with all the participants as well as widely on social media. So we will make sure that you will know when this is available online. Thank you so much, Sayed, and it's my pleasure to invite the next speaker. So can you join us, please, Dr. Hassan Uddin Ahmed, who is a climate and resilience expert, part of the project team in the country. It's been really a pleasure really working with you and others in the country. Over to you to give us the next presentation.
Thank you very much, Sabina. So it's my pleasure to introduce the next part, which is um, uh, uh, I think, let me share.
We can see your slides, Hassan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'll do, my life is, a little easier when Dr. Sahil is, so eloquently uh, established the connection between the two silos, and then presented the rationale why we believe that an integration of the two silos is so much important for taking decisions towards in a technically robust, but at the same time socially more conscious infrastructure. And it has let me take you to a historical journey. Global Center on Adaptation has already developed a climate resilient infrastructure officer handbook. To begin with, that's a global kind of documentation where public-private partnership, large infrastructures, how to make those infrastructure climate resilient. That part of the question is answered. So we took from there, but we didn't really stop there because that's part of the climate resilient infrastructure we'd all like to see. But then we moved on for some reason or the other. It's not coming through. Oh, gosh.
Okay.
Uh,
We can share our end, Hassan. That's probably easier, or you want to have
I
another
think
go?
the next slide, please. I have
Okay,
only a
so
few slides, but what I'm trying to say is that um, the information that you have just listened to, Dr. Sahil, it has a legacy. GCA has been trying to introduce this idea of climate resilient infrastructure, and all of a sudden, with the help of GCA, obviously, we extended that idea and included very important social development uh, ideas into hardcore engineering based climate resilient infrastructure, and try to see what additional benefit the society can accrue from this a integrated framework. Now obviously let me share the methodology. It has something to do with the literature survey. Obviously, there is very little on it. Of course, literature is divided into different silos, as it has been mentioned already. But then we went on to discuss this issue with local people. Trying to understand how do they perceive their vulnerabilities around them, and then how do they perceive what is needed to be able to reduce their vulnerability. And it is not just that engineering solution thereafter, but also they highlighted, and these are local people, just mostly women in different parts of the country, who are facing different types of vulnerabilities based on climate induced hazards. And then those rural people clearly identified what do they need when it comes to reducing their vulnerability. So we took note of that, and of course we talked to the government officials and technocrats, mostly those who are dealing with business as usual engineering solution regarding infrastructure. And then we again talked to different groups of people. For example, we invited students from 5 different public universities. Why? Because these public universities, when the students are selected, or they pass through the exam, initial examination, they come from all around the country. These are public universities, so they have better understanding just because they have education. At the same time, they carry their local level vulnerabilities, the signals which are available in different parts of the country. And then everything is put together on a table, and we try to analyze the situation around them and the need for particular socially conscious solutions that the infrastructure can bring in order to reduce their vulnerability. And of course, there were national level actors. When we all decided what kind of information we received from the field, and then what kind of solutions can there be on both sides, on climate resilient infrastructure as well as on socially inclusive infrastructure design. Then we took it to two different groups of people, again students and faculty members of two different universities. One is the Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology, to check the technological aspects of it. At the same time, we went to talk to students and faculty members of different departments of Jahangirnagar University, the second largest university of Bangladesh, where students and teachers, they responded to that question, what is socially needed, whether or not those are necessary, or whether or not our prescribed solution makes sense. And then with that validation, obviously we shared at the beginning the methodology with the General Economics Division, and towards the end we again went to talk to the different people, the bureaucrats as well as technocrats representing different technical organs of the government, to talk about whether or not these are timely steps into the future, trying to redesign a course towards greater sustainability of infrastructure, at the same time trying to be more responsive to societal needs. So the validation workshops went well with the General Economics Division. Now, in that process, in 5 different areas we have gone. One is the drought-prone and heat-stress-prone areas in the Central West. One is the flood-prone area in the Jamuna or the Greater Brahmaputra river basin. And then, of course, the erosion-prone Islampur and Bakshiganje area of Jamalpur district, which are both affected by both floods and erosion on a regular basis. Then we went on to the coastal zone, which is much talked about area for climate change, which is the southwestern region of Khulna, and then the central southern region of Barguna and Patuakhali, where cyclones often visited those places, and there are salinity ingress, and of course waterlogging issues are there. So, and then for the northeastern part, which is just sitting, below the wettest part of the globe in India, the Meghalaya hills, we went to Sylhet as well as the Sunamganj area, where flash flood is a common phenomena in that part of the country. So we went to different parts with different kinds of vulnerabilities and checked whether or not our ideas, and then trying to put together both climate responsive infrastructure as well as that resilience building can go further and become more inclusive for the societal needs. So we check those ideas, and the map shows you, different locations where we went and then talked to local people, and then obviously framed our response to resilience. Next slide, please. Okay, let me go. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. Now, of course, let me take you to the theoretical construct of vulnerability and reduction of vulnerability, which is, in other words, adaptation. According to IPCC understanding, vulnerability is proportionate to exposure. So, if the exposure to climate change related hazards or climate-induced hazards are low, then the overall vulnerability reduces significantly. But often we see that it is very difficult to change the exposure because it doesn't matter whether we emit from Bangladesh or we stop emitting from Bangladesh. It wouldn't really change the course of climate change a little, because most of the emissions are being happening in other parts of the world. But if you take the other slices, for example, vulnerability is directly proportional to sensitivity, meaning that if the sensitivity of an impinging hazard is low, then the vulnerability reduces significantly. And we have seen that happening in Bangladesh, not for climate change as such, but when we erect an embankment, if we change the crest height of the embankment, all on a sudden, with a little increase in water level in the rivers, the hinterland inside the embankment areas are no longer vulnerable. So the sensitivity reduces with change in the context. And that's why adaptation is context specific. So our tendency is to tweak with the sensitivity, lower the sensitivity so that the vulnerability reduces. And then the final part is adaptive capacity. If we have more adaptive capacity, then the vulnerability reduces. So there is an inverse relationship where vulnerability is inversely related to adaptive capacity. The higher the adaptive capacity, the lower the vulnerability. So our approach in general to climate sensitive infrastructure is to reduce sensitivity and, if possible, at the same time, make it more adaptive and with adaptive capacity of the infrastructure as well as of the society who are benefiting out of this infrastructure. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you very much. So here we go. For enhancing adaptive capacity, there are 5 different capacity building elements. One is human capital, which actually essentially tells us whether or not we have the skills and understanding, we have the right kind of training to have a better design or ability to design and so on and so forth. These are human capital. If we employ more human capital, the better design we have, then the infrastructure will be more useful towards reducing vulnerability. Environmental endowment, obviously, if a river is there and located nearby, or if there is a forest layer, then it absorbs the cyclonic pressure and the water can be easily drained off through the river. So this is how we design our adaptive capacity. Social capital is extremely important because the national level policies and the legal frameworks all are derived from social capital. The better the social capital, the lower the vulnerability. Then, of course, if we have a better design, if a better understanding of the system, then we need the financial capital, investment, mobilization capacity of those finances, and that allows us to invest in infrastructure for a better resilience. And then, of course, if we all have these, if we employ even the finance and the better design and technical people and their understanding and socially conscious people, obviously, then we expect that the physical capital will be enhanced and engineering solution, along with social construct, the infrastructure will be more resilient. Okay, next slide, please. Now, we can have adaptive infrastructure. Let me give you some examples, and these are all important examples. For example, flood drainage regulation and safeguarding croplands and agriculture. We all understand that we need that infrastructure because otherwise the croplands cannot be sustained. It will all the standing crops will be washed away, and in the agriculture sector, we have those FCD projects, and we have the we safeguard our croplands for food security. The next example is increased drainage capacity in roads. We have already seen in 2024 how a small river, the Muhuri River in the central eastern part, just with a little bit of additional water coming in, can wash off even the greater part of the national highway that reaches to the port city. And if we can include greater drainage capacity in roads, then the sensitivity of the road to water pressure will be lower, so sensitivity can be reduced. So this is how the technical design can help us in reducing sensitivity and reducing vulnerability. Flash floods and raised platforms in Howrah is a new concept. Now it allows farmers to bring in their harvest and quickly take out the pods from the straw, so that the volume is reduced, and then they can transport it very quickly. So the harvest process is quickly done even before the rainfall comes from Meghalaya. So this is how in Howrah people can safeguard their harvest by reducing sensitivity of the standing crops to incoming floods. Erosion and nature-based solution can also be useful. For example, hard points along Jamuna River. This is not nature-based, but a hard point in Jamuna River can safeguard the hinterland, including nowadays we have seen that the vulnerability of Jamuna riverbank cities, for example, Sirajganj city is now facing less vulnerability because the sensitivity is reduced to erosion. Cyclonic storm surge, we all know how multipurpose cyclone shelters can reduce the sensitivity of high winds and high water surge. Thereby people can safeguard their lives. So and then on top of that, the early warning system can actually make people aware early, so that they have greater lead time to arrange themselves and their assets, so that they can not only safeguard their lives, they can also safeguard their assets. So this is how adaptive capacity can be enhanced, and the infrastructure, the multipurpose cyclone shelters can be more sensitive, can be less sensitive to impinging cyclones, and the overall vulnerability can be significantly reduced. And we have all witnessed that throughout the last 20 years of cyclonic occurrences. Heat stress and drought, again, another example of a different kind. In the Central West region, augmentation of topsoil moisture, when it happens, then we irrigate our lands, and this is how the standing crops can have a reduced sensitivity to increasing high temperature, and our crop production is sustained. So this is another example. This is how we reduce vulnerability of our standing crops during the peak dry season. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. And now these are a few examples how we have seen those kind of infrastructure changing our society. And then obviously in the next presentation, hopefully you can bridge these ideas with the socially inclusive ideas. And we have an integrated set of ideas towards more sustainability. But at the same time, those are socially more inclusive and producing better results with perhaps minimum increase in overall cost of the project ideas. So I'll stop here. If you have any question, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Hassan, for this presentation. So this is really grounding the concept that climate resilient and adaptive infrastructure obviously has got, we can I suppose we can act on different elements or different parameters or components, and then you've highlighted them, not just the physical infrastructure, but also human capital, social capital. So it's hard and soft measures that we need to put in place, right? And understanding this also highlights where are those entry points? Where are the entry points for then in making sure that we are taking that gender and social inclusion lens which is currently not part of the process, right? I've got a question for you, and which is, all the hard questions, I guess, but that's okay because I've got experts in the room. It's good to just pick your brains and get your perspectives on this. So, in countries where you might not even have climate resilience and adaptation as a policy priority, so that might even not be there, and so therefore, this type of approaches that are more integrated, in terms of like the difficulty in integrating, but also if they're not a priority currently, how can we encourage governments to actually implement this type of approaches when it's not currently a priority, not even a climate resilience and adaptation, or it's not currently a priority? I don't know. Any thoughts on this?
Well, simple question, but very difficult to answer. But you know what? Bangladesh has been, part of the LDC, community. But if you look around, the first time when Bangladesh proposed to develop a multipurpose cyclone shelter, that was in 1994. And if you analyze the journey, the idea developed, and then obviously our bureaucrats and our technocrats all took the challenges to make it better and better with time, and the investment went in. And now what we see from 1994, when there was hardly any inclusion of socially conscious, solutions, it was like engineering design. Now, all of a sudden, we challenge ourselves whether or not there should be, separate toilets for women so that they can come happily stand there for 2 days, and yet, they can sustain for those, difficult times. Then we realize, okay, the design doesn't have any, arrangement for people with disability. And women who are pregnant, or women or men who are very old and cannot really climb up to the 18 feet, staircase. So came along the, concept of connecting roads, and also the ramp. Now you go to LGED, you will find a completely different design, which is more socially conscious, allowing more people to enjoy the same facility. So this is how things happen. But then we have to be relentlessly asking question, is this the right solution? And actually this study, I'm happy to be part of it, because this gives us clue what next. And look at the socially conscious solution set that we have, Sahil has mentioned. There are 3 different sets. We may not be able to commit right now for all the 3 sets, but with time and with better economic condition, hopefully our policymakers will say, okay, this is about time to implement this. So we put it in 3 different segments, and Sharmeen will possibly explain that in a much better way. That so this is made time independent, but it is for our policymakers and decision makers to think when they think we should commit to which part, and then we'll move on.
Right. And you talked about, I love the fact that this study included interaction with students, because, obviously they are the future leaders, right? Future professionals, future leaders, future technocrats or technical specialists. So they really need to be, as early as possible, just start to get them thinking about this. And also we interacted in this project with the local agencies. And try and understand, what are their also pain points, right? How can they actually even think about implementing new practices, or how they might be doing certain things already, but, do more of it, or maybe linking it better to the social and gender considerations. So what has been for you the highlight, I guess, in this consultation? What's been the biggest learning, from interacting with this?
I think we designed in such a fashion that, as you said, it's okay. They are young, but in 10 years' time, they will be the decision makers. Okay, they will lead us and then our future generation at the same time. So our focus has always been to talk to not only local people meaning those who will be, the target groups who will be enjoying the facilities, in a few years' time from now when it will be implemented. But at the same time, what is the local technocrats thinking about it? What are their views? We took note of that. Obviously, the way it is, they rely on the changes in design at the central level. So we talk to the people at central level, whether or not they are willing to challenge themselves and come up with a better design. And then, of course, there we confronted one potential, consideration for the decision-making processes. What about cost? Then, of course, we showed, you can have benefit cost analysis for both the cases or maybe intermediate cases and then present it to the policymakers. Then we talked to the GED. Whether or not they have the political will and to carry it forward, they have that appetite. And they said, yes, why not? If we do not think today, it will be rather late. So not waste time. Let us do it now and then allow the policymakers to intervene when they feel it is the right time. So this is a learning process for all of us. But at the same time, we also got reflections of their ideas at different layers of our society. And I think one of the better design of a study when we're talking about action research.
Thank you. And just to wrap up, and it's so important, I think, to also highlight the process, right? That this study and the methodology, because that's also very transferable, right? In other countries in South Asia might be thinking about engaging in different level of governance, engaging different groups and so forth. So we really hope that this resource that we developed will be really useful, because the others can pick up from lessons from what we've done and then transfer them in their own context. So thank you so much, Hassan.
Thank you very much.
Now it's time to move to the next speaker. So I'd like to invite Professor Sharmin Nelormi. She's a climate and gender expert. So welcome, Sharmin. The floor is yours for a presentation. Oh, you're there now. Yes. Hello. Will we share the slides for you, or will you?
Yeah, please.
We share the slides for you. Okay, no problem. Thank you. And just to highlight while the slides are being uploaded, that this has been a very much a multidisciplinary and almost like interdisciplinary team, I think, that's worked together. So obviously the previous speaker, Hassan, obviously with like a very strong expertise in climate resilient infrastructure and adaptation. And then we now have the pleasure to have Sharmin, who's an expert on a quite different discipline, but it is super important that we are getting all of these different expert perspectives if we want to really design an integrated infrastructure process and development. Sharmin, over to you.
Thank you, Savina, for the interdisciplinary to take on board. By training, I am an economist, but I have been working in the interface of climate change, economics, and gender for long. And I always intend to do my research with scientists so that I can understand really what's happening in a scientific way. So our scope of work in this entails 3 sectors: transport, social, and energy infrastructure. And then what do we mean by inclusive infrastructure? Inclusive infrastructure guides us towards any infrastructure development that enhances positive outcomes in social inclusivity and ensures no individual, community, or social group is left behind or prevented from benefiting from improved infrastructure. So we can recall the SDG target that no one left behind. Next slide, please. So why gender? Then we need to understand the context of the society in terms of social inequality, also intersectionality, marginalization based on class, identity, physical challenges, So we were discussing about PWDs. Irrespective of climate change perturbations, even in the business as usual scenario, women and men have differential vulnerabilities. They have differential objectives for mobility, accessing transport modalities, timing of mobility, one stop versus multiple stop travel pattern to destination. BBS, the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, revealed that in cases of travel for family, in cases of travel for family reasons, you can see in the slide, women's participation is larger. But when it comes to domestic services like going for groceries, buying goods for the families and others, the modality of men outplays. Next slide, please. In Bangladesh, women's mobility depends on the use of informal transport, and that too largely by walking. You can see the slide. Just think about our 4 million female ready-made garments workers. The RMG sector, which receives more than 85% of our export earning, they walk to work and back to home every morning and the evening or even after dusk. Next slide, please. So what are the concerns in terms of mobility? Harassment to different scales are the largest threat for the free-flowing mobility in Bangladesh for women. And I'm sure that that is most probably very likely to other LDCs as well. Next slide, please. The population density is one of the highest in Bangladesh. We inherited a good public railway network, which historically was the vehicle for a large number of people's mobility. Since our independence in 1971, Bangladesh Railway's share in long-distance passenger market was about 30%. Unfortunately, while during 2006 onwards, market grew for more than tenfold, Bangladesh Railway's share fell more than tenfold, came down to 2.8% only from 30%. Aspiration of Bangladesh Railway Master Plan is 15% market share by 2045. Next slide, please. Yeah. Bangladesh has the highest population per route per kilometer, while the network size of Bangladesh Railway and the area per route per kilometer is among the lowest in the region. This leads to overcrowded commuting trains, and crowding may lead to harassment. In terms of commuters' ease and transportation of goods, with an expanding economy, the railway must revisit its plan for share. Next slide, please. Now we are talking about energy access. Energy access is used as a dummy variable for socio-economic development quite often. Bangladesh, approaching to LDC graduation, having 72% of the population without access to clean cooking fuels. This is the status right now. Death rates from indoor air pollution is one of the highest among the Asian and LDC countries. You can see from the slide. So enhanced access to energy is a development aspiration. We need to address the GHG calculation, of course, but without compromising this requirement of women being the primary responsible for cooking for the families. Next slide, please. Bangladesh government regularly publish actually gender budget. And since 2009, until that, 44 ministries, agencies have reported their part of gender relevant allocation. It demonstrates that agencies, departments related to infrastructure lack female employment. It mostly hovers around 10%. So this is the context. Now we shall take you to the route, to the fields, where we traveled and engaged with local people, local level agencies that Asan actually described. There are good practices, also challenges, creating rooms for improvement. The list is not exhausting, as you understand. To cover it in 15 minutes is not possible, but we are trying. The main report will bring more insights. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, LGED, Local Government Engineering Department, mandated to develop and maintain our local level infrastructure, did a fascinating job in terms of creating connectivity to rural areas and getting to hard to reach areas. The attribution to our economic development by LGD is widely recognized. In a bid to address rural poverty, LGD has the legal mandate to employ local poor men and women in its infrastructure construction and maintenance programs and projects. The process of engagement of local poor men and women has taken a formal shape through the formation of the provision of a labor contracting society called LCAS, backed by our Public Procurement Rule and Act. Next slide, please. Next slide. The maintenance LCS is one of its kind which can be replicated in other LECs. So I'm giving you one example. 10 women from one union, lowest local government tier, are selected through participatory processes for the maintenance engagement of rural roads, sluice gates, and other infrastructure by LGD. A fixed monthly salary is given. A part of that salary is kept separate in the bank as savings. During their tenure, training on skill and accounting is given to the workers. Yeah. After the withdrawal of European Union support in road maintenance, government in Bangladesh actually has been financing. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. We all know and have been talking about globally acclaimed multi-purpose cyclone shelter. The initial design was in 1990s, and we revisited it, and the new design criteria gets a number of inclusive features. Good practices are there, no doubt. But the pictures are taken from Patharghata, a coastal sub-district. You can see the ramps are made, but the approach roads often do not meet the accessibility criteria. The slope of the ramp and drainage should be carefully designed so that waterlogging can be avoided during cyclonic water surges. However, practices are there, good practices, but there are rooms for improvement even within the given provision and resources. Next slide, please. So there is another good example of good practice. Separate toilet provisions have been installed in many infrastructure, in schools, in hospitals, in many offices, social infrastructure. The picture is from an energy octane refueling station on our way to field, where separate toilets have been made and placed at the front side of the refueling station in such a way that women do not feel insecure. Also, solar energy is used for 24 hours lighting. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. These pictures are from a jetty while we were traveling to Barguna, a coastal district. You can see there are separate toilets, but the female toilet is underlocked. The approach road to the jetty has access issues, not suited to persons with disabilities, elderly, pregnant women. Management is a huge issue, not only for this infrastructure only. In general, there are lackings in maintenance, and people are deprived of accessing uh, installed services. Next slide, please. So Dr. Asan was talking about flash floods in the Howrah region. This picture are from the Howrahs in the northeastern part of Bangladesh. And this is Hati. Hati is locally called. These are small land or island in Howrah areas susceptible to flash floods and wave interaction-led erosion. In this picture, this Hati is under protection from wave interaction. We locally call AFAL. However, the inhabitants lack basic sanitation facilities. Addressing sanitation facilities and hygiene, the basic one, may not incur much additional cost. A question to SIL was regarding additional cost. So the marginal benefit might be much higher if we integrate social needs. Next slide, please. Yeah, the left one. The first picture is from Ishodi, the northwest dry part on the bank of Ganges. And the second one, a recreational open space called Nilima Point at Patharghata, Barguna district, a coastal belt. Women spends their evening time there. Next slide, please. So this is a fascinating picture from number 6 Tahirpur Sadar Union Parishad complex in Sunamganj district, that to a Howrah area, the northeastern part of Bangladesh. Our team had the privilege to spend a nice evening over there after the whole day field work. So the story is the primary infrastructure is road or embankments. However, the local government authority took the liberty to use these as public amenities, parks, without affecting the asset quality. And these are guided by our Water Asset Management Plan 2017. Next slide, please. So this is a school area. The school children are at risk of facing accidents as there are, you can see there are no footpaths just outside the school boundaries and no waiting area outside. It is actually, we found it in every university outside boundary, and the female students complained against that they had to face different difficulties as there are no walkways or footpaths outside the boundaries. So footpaths are required at the Upojila roads at least. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting picture. The picture is from a school just adjacent to UNO office of Patharghata. Many of the amenities for the kids are installed, you can see. But the approach roads, playing fields are also critical infrastructure. And you can see that these can be out of reach for the kids, even in a regular rainy day. So careful designing and maintenance are very critical. Next slide, please. So in our public procurement rule 2025, we have provisions for relatively smaller financial bidders. They are allowed. This actually encourages women contractors, assuming that women have lesser ability and financing ability to make open bidding. Also, the procurement law says that whether the design criteria, the construction phase, they procure commodities and gadgets for women workers, that will also be noticed. So this is a very good move in terms of gender integration in the procurement process. So the very last slide. So what are the key takeaway messages? So many of the infrastructure in Bangladesh integrate climate change adaptation. For example, Asan cited it. We have flood control, drainage, irrigation infrastructure, cyclone shelter. We have a reasonably good post-hazard agro-food system management, including entire supply and value chain. However, climate change tends to have adverse impacts on infrastructure. Adaptation planning is inevitable. So, while designing for climate robust infrastructure, efforts must be made towards reducing sensitivity to impinging sensitivity and enhancing adaptive capacity. And if we make inclusive infrastructure, that will lead to enhanced adaptive capacity. Women and men face differential vulnerability under climate change, and marginal people's aspirations and needs are largely unmet. Gender lens is critical in every phase of a project cycle. The marginal benefit is much higher. So it's not about cost, it's all about additional cost and marginal benefit. Provision must be backed by proper social analysis and after completion maintenance facilities. And it creates sustainability, and there must be a very good sustainable exit plan. Women are very good at maintenance. This engagement saves further investment on major repair or rebuild. And last but not the least, coordination among different actors, maybe involved in different project cycles, are very important. So I end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charmaine, for this presentation. Lots of examples. Lots of examples from the field trips and the consultations, and that really brings it to life, I guess, to see, what has already been done, what could be improved. So thank you for this. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, particularly picking up on the stakeholder consultation. Obviously, you've been out in the field, you did the key informant interviews and the focus group discussions and so forth. Talked to many different people. I mean, quite impressive number of people that you managed to talk to in different parts of the country. But often these consultations, they are kind of a little bit kind of consultative or academic exercises that then do not influence the decision making, the policy decisions, and so forth. So what do you think could be done to actually ensure that these consultations are meaningful, are kind of more, they have more of an opportunity to influence the decision being made?
Yeah. So first of all, you can see from the methodology that we only don't go to the vulnerable population, but also we go to hotspot areas and talk to young faculty members, young female students who are the future of Bangladesh. And the validation was done through them. And we had very good insight from them. And I think for a credible research, when we presented it in LGD and we shared it with LGD and other custodian agencies, they had the interest to get the report and they wanted to give their insights in it. And we are happy. We promise that after the final draft, we will share them. And many things are happening around. For example, GED, General Economic Division of Planning Commission, who actually drives the main development programs in Bangladesh, they are also working on climate resilient infrastructure and the development project indicators. So they are also interested to make it comprehensive for big projects and get insights from this report. So I think the very methodology involving young, educated, and vulnerable population, on the both ways. Of course, the custodian agencies are very experienced. So this have created a credible environment to get to the policy level.
And obviously, hopefully, pointing people from different vulnerable groups or minorities into leadership positions, right, would also help, I suppose, both side, top down, bottom up, right, by ensuring that we are kind of connecting the consultation with the appropriate agencies, as you've done. This is really, actually, this methodology is quite it's quite impressive in trying to tackle different levels of governments and different groups and connecting them. Something else, there was a question in the chat that was already being answered, but this is actually quite important. And it is, although the integration of climate, gender, and social inclusion and infrastructure is fairly novel, the kind of that integration aspect, there's been many maybe guides being produced or studies that maybe looked at specific aspects of them, but they are not very accessible or have not been promoted or disseminated enough, right? If you look at so how can we, this guide, in this study, we hope will be widely disseminated and we can learn from it. But how can we ensure that this type of knowledge and this type of practices become more business as usual, rather than just being project specific in different pocket of sectors or countries and so forth? How can we just do this?
Thank you very much, because it relates to the sustainability of knowledge. It's just a relay race, right? So that is why the focal point of our policy discussion was GED. GED is General Economic Division of Planning Commission, who drives the whole development agenda of Bangladesh. So as they're interested, the whole guide might not be useful for them, but they have requested us to come up with some quick checklists so that the government officials, because climate change is not the only focus for roads and highways or LGD or other officials who makes design, who prepare budgets and all that. But from this, if we can come up with a quick checklist so that that can be integrated in our development projects, and GD is interested to host that, I think that will add the value of this guide.
Thank you. And this is really very much what the approach we've taken also in producing these materials, right? Practitioner-oriented and implementation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, Kavina. In many, we have been, exploring guidelines, circulars for planning commissions. There are resilient guidelines, climate change guidelines, and we came to know that even the institutional memory are lost. So people get to another ministries, so, and then they don't know where the documents are. But if the DPP, Development Project Pro Forma, integrates this, kind of, checklist in its practice, it will sustain.
So it's about really finding the actors and finding the entry points and finding the current policy and regulatory frameworks that wouldn't allow you to just make the adjustments, right, into the development process, I guess. I think maybe yes. Did you want? Oh no, okay. Maybe one last thing, if I can bring the project team, maybe all on the screen, I can ask my colleagues to just bring them all on screen and maybe have just final words on Hassan, you're now back on screen. And Sayal, yes, thank you. So this is really, this is a stellar, I would say, project team that has brought expertise in many different disciplines and worked together to integrate their own expertise with field work, with research. So this is like, a great opportunity to produce something that we really hope will be helpful and it will be transferable. I mean, obviously, it is important for Bangladesh, but as we say in this webinar many times, these processes can be hopefully widely replicable. Maybe one final words for you. Yes, just anything that you would want to say in terms of where should we, something that could be easily first step. What could be a first step towards this type of approaches? Who wants to go first? I've ambushed you on this. I know, but one first step that would be an easy enough first step that countries can take towards this type of integrated approaches. Yes, Hassan.
Thank you. I think we are already, committed to that because this kind of a guideline, if we have it in our own language, that would be a great first step. Because we know the actors, we know where to go, we know that there are, gender cells even in LGED and other custodian, infrastructure custodian agencies. But then, if we have the document in Bangla, people will, take it seriously, hopefully, and make it work. So that's the first step.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, which will happen, right? There will be a translation in the local language that will hopefully disseminate even more. Like a super quick final word from you two, maybe Charmaine first and then Sayal.
Yeah. So from the field, just quickly, women are not homogeneous, but the thing is, relatively elder women, they are in the mode of full submission. So they at best try coping. But for younger women, practicing adaptation, having aspiration, and intents to act for changes, those are so vibrant. So I think it's time to invest on youths and making them aware that climate change adaptation and inclusive infrastructure, those have, much more co-benefits for the society. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sayal, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I think thinking about resilience and infrastructure, not from the asset perspective, but from the user's perspective. Who do you want to provide the infrastructure for? And I think as long as we think it that way, we're going to move towards infrastructure that is helpful for everybody, that is resilient for everybody, and it's going to generate more benefits for society, which I think is the end goal at the end.
Okay. On that note, thank you so much to the speakers for your insights and expertise. I suppose sharing that is a wealth, I think, and it should be done more widely. Thank you to GCA, obviously, which is the project, owner of this. So thank you to the government of Canada for supporting this project. And then I'll just close the webinar here. Thank you so much to all the audience for attending today. Keep an eye out for the guide to be published in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And I'll just wish you a good rest of the day.